Anything that happens before or after, it's just waiting.
Steve McQueen was Hollywood's king of cool, but the life behind that image was anything but simple. The fast cars, hit films, and calm stare hid a private world filled with temptation, jealousy, broken trust, and relationships that rarely stayed easy for long. He married 3 times, crossed lines he could not always undo, and left more than one woman with a very different version of the man audiences thought they knew. Some romances became headlines. Others stayed buried for years. And as his life moved toward its final chapter, old choices began to look very different. Join us as we step behind the legend and uncover the marriages, affairs, secrets, and complicated women who knew Steve McQueen far better than the public ever really did. The boy who learned not to depend on anyone. Terrence Stephen McQueen was born on March 24, 1930, in Beech Grove, Indiana. His father, stunt pilot William McQueen, left when Steve was still a baby. His mother, Julia, struggled to raise him and later left him with her parents in Slater, Missouri. Steve remembered those farm years warmly, especially his great-uncle Claude, who became one of the strongest male figures in his childhood. Claude gave him a red tricycle when he turned 4, and Steve later linked that gift to the love of speed that stayed with him for life. When Steve was 8, his mother took him back to live with her and a stepfather in Indianapolis. The change was harsh. Steve was dyslexic, partly deaf after a childhood ear infection, and struggled badly in school. Home was worse. His stepfather beat him, and Steve ran away to the streets when he was only 9. He later explained the hurt simply. When a kid doesn't have any love when he's small, he begins to wonder if he's good enough. His mother later moved him to Los Angeles, but another violent stepfather brought more trouble. Steve rebelled, joined gangs, committed petty crimes, and was caught stealing hubcaps. After another beating, he warned his stepfather, "You lay your stinking hands on me again, and I swear I'll kill you." Soon after, his mother signed papers sending him to the California Junior Boys Republic. At first, the other boys punished him whenever his mistakes cost the group privileges. But Steve slowly changed. He became respected, joined the Boys' Council, and left at 16 with a stronger sense of discipline. He would later return to the school after becoming famous. Yet before Hollywood, there was more drifting ahead. He briefly joined a circus, worked odd jobs, spent time around a brothel in the Dominican Republic, and even served 30 days on a chain gang. The restless boy was searching for somewhere to belong. The pattern was clear. Steve kept leaving before anyone could leave him. But his next stop would force this rebel into something he had always resisted: the strict discipline of military life. The Marines gave the rebel a direction. In 1947, Steve entered the U.S. Marines with his mother's permission because he was not yet 18. Discipline did not come naturally. He later joked that he was busted back down to private about 7 times, and after staying away with his girlfriend Barbara Ross for 2 weeks, he was caught and spent 41 days in the brig. That punishment became a turning point. Steve began taking the Marines more seriously, and later helped save 5 men during an Arctic exercise by pulling them from a tank before it broke through the ice. He eventually joined the honor guard responsible for guarding Harry Truman's yacht, USS Williamsburg. When Steve left the Marines with an honorable discharge in 1950, he said the experience had changed him. "The Marines made a man out of me. I learned how to get along with others, and I had a platform to jump off." He soon used that platform to chase acting. In 1952, with help from the GI Bill, Steve began studying in New York under teachers including Sanford Meisner, Uta Hagen, and Stella Adler. Acting school also brought one of the first known women in his romantic story. He met actress Gia Scala in Stella Adler's class, and the two dated while both were still trying to build careers. At the same time, Steve kept racing motorcycles on weekends, often earning money that helped support him while acting remained uncertain. For a man who had spent years drifting, he was finally building a direction. But New York would not hold him for long. Soon, Hollywood would call, and Steve would meet the woman who stood beside him before the world knew his name. Nyla Adams met him before Hollywood did. By late 1955, Steve had left New York and moved to Los Angeles, where better acting chances seemed possible. Around that time, Nyla Adams was already building a career. She was a dancer, singer, and actress with Broadway work behind her, while Steve was still struggling to be noticed. They met in 1956 and married only 4 months later, on November 2nd. Nail later remembered that one of their early dates began with Steve putting her on a motorcycle and telling her to hold on tight. She had never ridden one before. Steve told her, "I will take care of you. I will always take care of you." In later years, she said he kept that promise in a complicated way. At first, Nyla's name carried more weight than his. She introduced Steve to her agent at William Morris, read his scripts, and pushed him toward projects she thought could help his career. Eventually, she stopped working as much while he moved ahead. As she later put it, they changed positions. He became the star, and she became the person supporting him behind the scenes. Their backgrounds also connected them. Both had known neglect when they were young, but Nyla believed they handled that pain very differently. She said Steve never truly got over his childhood problems, while she learned to move forward. Their family grew as his career did. Their daughter Terry was born in 1959, and their son Chad followed in 1960. Steve was also starting to get real attention on screen. He appeared in Somebody Up There Likes Me, then landed his first leading movie role in The Blob. Television changed everything. His role as bounty hunter Josh Randall in Wanted, Dead or Alive made him a household name and gave audiences the cool, distant anti-hero image that would follow him for years. At home, however, Nyla was seeing a much fuller picture. Fame was arriving fast, and with it came new attention, new freedom, and new temptations. Their marriage had begun before Steve McQueen became the King of Cool. Now, they were about to find out what that title would cost. Fame arrived, and so did the other women. According to Nyla, Steve's first affair during their marriage came in 1957 while he was making Never Love a Stranger. He later admitted to her that he had a fling with actress Lita Milan. Nyla would remember it as the beginning of a pattern that troubled their marriage for years. Steve was no longer just the husband of a successful Broadway performer. His own career was finally moving, and Hollywood was beginning to notice the mix of danger, confidence, and mystery that made him stand out. That television success opened the door to bigger movies, and Hollywood quickly took notice. Frank Sinatra helped him land a role in Never So Few, and director John Sturges soon cast him in The Magnificent Seven. Steve had a habit of finding ways to pull attention toward himself on screen. Yul Brynner reportedly disliked the little movements Steve added in the background because they drew attention. It worked. The film became a hit and pushed Steve toward movie stardom. As his fame rapidly grew, so did the stories around his private life. Mamie Van Doren later claimed she had an affair with him around 1959. She also said they experimented with hallucinogens together. Steve was married and already building a family with Nyla at the time. That contrast would become difficult to ignore. Publicly, he was becoming the strong, cool man audiences wanted to watch. Privately, Neeley was learning that charm could make life much harder at home. She later said Steve would even bring her presents when he had affairs with flower children. Yet she also insisted that his behavior with women did not change how loving he could be with their children. By 1960, his career had entered another level with The Magnificent Seven, and the anti-hero image was no longer something he only played on television. It was becoming part of the Steve McQueen legend. The problem was that life had its own rules, and Neeley was beginning to understand that success would not make him easier to live with. It would give him more chances to test how much their marriage could survive. The bigger Steve became, the messier his marriage got. The 1960s turned Steve from a rising actor into one of Hollywood's biggest stars. The Great Escape in 1963 gave him the kind of role that matched his real interests perfectly. He rode motorcycles on screen, although friend Bud Ekins performed the famous fence jump for insurance reasons. Steve later corrected Johnny Carson when Carson praised him for it, saying, "It wasn't me, that was Bud Ekins." He followed with Love with the Proper Stranger, Nevada Smith, and The Cincinnati Kid. Then, The Sand Pebbles brought him his only Academy Award nomination. By 1968, Bullitt made his connection with speed even stronger. Steve did some of the driving himself, and the San Francisco chase became one of his best-known screen moments. The Thomas Crown affair showed another side of his image that same year, while the Reavers followed in 1969. Off-screen, his marriage was carrying far more pressure than audiences could see. Actress and model Lauren Hutton later said she had an affair with Steve around 1964, while he was still married to Neeley. Neeley blamed part of their growing distance on the sexual freedom of the late 1960s. She said, "Everybody was having free love and free sex. If he could get free love out there, why would he work hard for it at home?" Drugs also entered the marriage. Neeley said Steve experimented with peyote early on, and that cocaine later became a constant presence. Yet his darker fears could surface in other ways too. After the 1969 Manson killings, Steve learned that his name had reportedly appeared on an alleged celebrity hit list. He had known Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring, and the murders hit close to home. He became more paranoid and started carrying a pistol. The fearless image fans admired was becoming more complicated behind closed doors. Steve could command a movie set, race at high speed, and project total control on screen. But inside his marriage, jealousy, drugs, affairs, and old insecurities were starting to collide. And Neeley was living with that contradiction daily. Before long, Neeley would discover just how dangerous that mix could become. The night Steve's jealousy went too far. By the early 1970s, Steve and Neeley had been together for well over a decade, but the marriage was breaking under years of affairs, drugs, jealousy, and anger. Neeley later described one frightening night when Steve was using cocaine and became obsessed with the idea that she had been unfaithful. She teased him by saying that his was not the only golden man in the West, and then admitted she had been with a European Academy Award winner. According to her account, Steve reacted with rage. He returned with a gun, held it to her temple, demanded the man's name, and slapped her while forcing the story out of her. Nyla wrote that his face finally changed, and he looked at her with hatred. Not long after, she became pregnant. In her memoir, she said Steve doubted the baby was his, and that the physical and emotional pressure became impossible to bear. She traveled from France to Britain for an abortion in 1971. Naila later explained that she wanted the baby, but felt she could not handle both a pregnancy and the abuse she said was continuing. Their marriage was already near the end, and Steve was also becoming involved with someone else. During 1971 and 1972, while separated from Niall, he had a relationship with Barbara Lee, his Junior Bonner co-star. That relationship also ended in a pregnancy and abortion. At the same time, Steve's career remained intense. Le Mans, his passion project about racing, arrived in 1971, followed by Junior Bonner. Yet the private damage could no longer be hidden behind work. Nyla later said she stayed as long as she did partly because of their children, and partly because she hoped Steve would change. She also made clear that, despite his problems, he never turned that abuse toward Terry or Chad. On March 14, 1972, after more than 15 years of marriage, Steve and Nyla divorced. Their marriage was over, but Nyla would later say their connection never fully disappeared. Before that bond had even settled into a new form, however, Steve was already falling hard for another married Hollywood star. Then Steve fell for another man's wife. Steve met Ally McGraw while making The Getaway, and the attraction between them quickly became impossible to ignore. Ally was already a major star. Goodbye, Columbus had brought her a Golden Globe. Love Story earned her an Academy Award nomination, and by 1972, she had been voted the top female film star in the world. She was also married to producer Robert Evans, with whom she had a young son, Josh. Steve was still married to Nyla when the relationship began, although that marriage was already collapsing. Ally later described what pulled her toward him in very simple terms. She said their connection was chemical, and remembered that Steve could walk into a room and make men, women, and children stop and notice him. She also saw the danger in him from the beginning. To her, he was incredibly attractive, but there was always a bad boy edge underneath. Their affair became public during The Getaway, creating a scandal around two married stars. Ally separated from Evans in 1972, and after months of change, her divorce was finalized on June 7, 1973. Just over a month later, on July 12th, she married Steve in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The speed of it made their romance look like one of Hollywood's great dramatic love stories. Steve's career was also at a huge peak. The Getaway became a box office success, and by that period he was the world's highest-paid actor. He followed it with Papillon, taking on the demanding role of a prisoner on Devil's Island. And in 1974, he shared top billing with Paul Newman in The Towering Inferno. Steve even pushed for equal dialogue because Newman's role originally had more lines. He received $1 million plus a share of the gross and insisted on doing his own stunts. Everything about him looked powerful from the outside: his films, his money, his image, and his new marriage. But the same intensity that made the affair exciting did not disappear once they became husband and wife. Behind the Malibu privacy, the passion that had pulled them together was already turning into jealousy, control, and serious problems neither of them could easily escape. Steve and Ally's love story had a much darker side. At first, Steve and Ally built a quieter life in Malibu. Ally remembered days spent half-dressed on the beach, casual barbecues, beer, marijuana, and neighbors who included Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. She liked that their world did not feel like a non-stop Hollywood party. But the marriage soon showed the same problems that had hurt Steve's first one. Ally later said there were times that were wonderful, and others that were just ghastly. His jealousy became a major issue. According to accounts of their marriage, Steve did not want Ally taking romantic roles and questioned her intensely about other men. Her acting career slowed sharply while they were together. She had been one of the biggest female stars in the world. Yet after marrying Steve, she did not appear in another film until 1978. Their relationship also carried a painful personal loss when Ally suffered a miscarriage. Steve's desire to keep her close affected his own work too. Director William Friedkin wanted him for Sorcerer, which would shoot mainly in the Dominican Republic. Steve did not want to spend that long away from Ali. He asked Friedkin to let her join the production as a producer so she could remain with him. Friedkin refused and gave the role to Roy Scheider. Later, Friedkin believed losing Steve hurt the movie at the box office. By then, Steve had already begun stepping back from Hollywood. After the towering inferno, he spent more time traveling in a motorhome, riding motorcycles, and chasing the freedom he had always loved. The marriage, however, kept getting harder. Allie later said she wished they could have grown old together sober, a comment that captured both the love and the damage between them. They separated before the decade ended and divorced on August 9, 1978. Steve's close friend, Pat Johnson, later claimed Allie remained the true love of his life and said Steve was madly in love with her until the day he died. Yet love had not been enough to make the marriage safe or stable. Even before it officially ended, another woman had already caught Steve's attention. Then a model in an advertisement caught Steve's eye. Around the time Steve's marriage to Allie was ending, another woman caught his attention in an unusual way. He saw fashion model Barbara Minty in an advertisement and asked his agent to arrange a meeting. Barbara later said they met in July 1977 at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. She was much younger than Steve and had built a successful modeling career. But the man she got to know was already moving away from the Hollywood life that had made him famous. She later described him as someone who rode bikes, drove pickup trucks, drank old Milwaukee beer, wore worn clothes, and preferred simple roadside food to fashionable restaurants. In her words, she met him during a really mellow stage of his life. Steve had spent years surrounded by movie sets, fame, affairs, and arguments. With Barbara, his world became smaller and quieter. In 1978, he returned to acting in An Enemy of the People, playing a bearded 19th-century doctor rather than the action hero audiences expected. The film never received a proper theatrical release. Away from work, flying became another escape. Steve owned several aircraft, including a yellow Stearman biplane, and in the spring of 1979, he and Barbara moved into an airport hangar in Santa Paula, California. Their setup was simple. They had a king-size bed on the floor, a dining table, chairs, and a portable television. Each morning, Steve made coffee and opened the hangar doors. Barbara later remembered the view as magnificent. Santa Paula reminded Steve of the Missouri town where he had spent some of his happiest childhood years. The famous actor blended into local life, and people in town largely left him alone. He still loved motorcycles, cars, planes, and the freedom of moving at his own pace, but the frantic Hollywood years were fading behind him. In late 1979, Steve and Barbara moved from the hangar to a 15-acre ranch. It looked like the beginning of a calmer chapter. Instead, just as Steve had found a quieter home and a new partner, his body was already giving him signs that something was wrong and could no longer be ignored. Just as Steve settled down, his body betrayed him. Steve had developed a persistent cough in early 1978. He stopped smoking and tried antibiotics, but nothing fixed it. His breathing became worse, and on December 22, 1979, after filming The Hunter, a biopsy revealed pleural mesothelioma. Steve believed asbestos exposure was responsible. He had encountered asbestos while serving in the Marines, including while removing insulation from pipes on a troop ship. And he also thought movie sound stages, racing suits, and helmets may have exposed him over the years. Yet in the middle of that fear, Steve made another commitment. On January 16, 1980, less than a month after learning he had cancer, he quietly married Barbara Minty at their ranch. They had dated for years, but Barbara stayed beside him through the final stretch. By February 1980, doctors found that the cancer had spread. Steve was also changing in another way. Barbara later wrote that the man who had been raised Catholic became an evangelical Christian near the end of his life. His flying instructor, Sammy Mason, Sammy's son, Pete, and Barbara all played a part in that change. Steve began attending Ventura Missionary Church and was visited by evangelist Billy Graham shortly before his death. At the same time, he completed the last work of his acting career. Tom Horn and the Hunter were both released in 1980. The second film returned him to the role of a modern bounty hunter, bringing his career close to where television fame had first begun. But the confident man audiences saw on screen was now fighting something he could not outrun. Steve tried to keep the diagnosis private, perhaps wanting control over one more part of a life that had always been lived on his terms. That secrecy did not last. On March 11, 1980, the National Enquirer reported that he had terminal cancer. Fans now knew what Steve and those closest to him had been carrying for months. He had spent decades taking risks, surviving crashes, hard living, broken relationships, and dangerous choices. This time, however, the danger was inside his own body, and conventional doctors were telling him there was little they could do. Steve risked everything for one more chance. By the summer of 1980, Steve knew American doctors did not believe they could prolong his life. He refused to accept that answer. In July, he traveled to Rosarito Beach, Mexico, searching for another option. There he turned to William Donald Kelly, a man widely dismissed by the medical world as a quack. Kelly promoted an alternative cancer program that included coffee enemas, frequent shampoos, massages, injections made with live animal cells, and Laytrial, a treatment already known to be toxic and ineffective against cancer. Steve paid for the program in cash. Reports said the cost could reach more than $40,000 a month. Kelly was not a cancer specialist. His only medical license had been in orthodontics, and even that license had been revoked in 1976. None of this stopped Steve. The man who had spent his life pushing against limits now faced the one limit he could not accept. For about 3 months, he stayed in Mexico and followed Kelly's program. The treatments drew attention from both the regular press and the tabloids once people discovered that one of Hollywood's most famous stars was relying on such methods. Kelly publicly claimed Steve would recover completely and return to normal life. The reality was very different. Steve returned to the United States in early October, and his condition soon became worse. The cancer had spread through his body, and large tumors had developed in his abdomen. Even then, he was not ready to stop looking for a way out. The same stubbornness that had helped the abused child survive, the Marine change his life, the actor fight for better roles, and the racer push harder now turned toward survival itself. But his body was weakening fast. By late October, doctors in the United States warned that a large tumor on his liver could not safely be removed. It weighed around 5 pounds, and they believed Steve's heart was too weak to survive the operation. He had already ignored safer advice once by pursuing Kelly's treatments. Now he was preparing for an even greater risk, one final trip to Mexico that could cost him almost everything. The women Steve left behind. In late October 1980, Steve flew to Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, for surgery on the large tumor in his abdomen, despite warnings that his heart might not survive it. He checked into a small clinic under the name Samuel Shepard. Doctors operated on tumors in his neck and abdomen, but about 12 hours later, at 3:45 a.m. on November 7th, Steve died of a heart attack. He was only 50. He was later cremated, and his ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean. What remained were very different memories from the women who had shared his life. Barbara Minty had been his wife for less than 10 months, and later wrote about their quiet final period together in Steve McQueen. The Last Mile. Ali MacGraw never remarried after their divorce. Years later, she admitted their relationship had been both beautiful and painful. She called their attraction chemical and said, "I wish we had both grown old sober." Nyla Adams carried the longest history with him. She knew Steve before fame, helped guide his early career, raised their children, lived through his affairs, and still remained connected to him after their divorce. In a 2023 interview, she called their bond an everlasting love. She said Steve continued turning to her for advice and would tell her, "It was always you." She also never forgot the promise he made when they were young. "I will always take care of you." Years after everything they had been through, Neely still remembered the promise Steve made when they were young. "I will always take care of you." For a relationship marked by love, affairs, anger, and divorce, those words carried a very different weight after he was gone. Of all the women in Steve McQueen's life, who do you think truly understood him best? Do you think the king of cool image hid a man who never really knew how to handle love and commitment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.